favorite DFS picks in the following price ranges. Your favorite quarterback over $6,500. Geoff, who is it?
It's going to be Russell Wilson this week at right around $7,500. Not right around, right at $7,500, excuse me. And look, I mean, there's a lot of talk about Kyler Murray having a great week. People are on Tom Brady here, but Russell Wilson gets the Tennessee Titans. And one thing we know about teams that play the Tennessee Titans, they like to throw the ball. Teams threw the ball right around 39 times per game against Tennessee, second most in the league last year. And that kind of trickled down to last week as well. They allowed Kyler Murray about 9 yards per pass attempt last year. Kyler, obviously, 5 touchdowns. The bottom line here, this is just a great matchup. It's a great fantasy matchup. Russell Wilson threw 4 touchdowns on 23 passes last week. I absolutely love this matchup. Seattle's got the second highest implied team total right behind Cleveland as well. I think this is just a game where people are almost just going to forget it, that Russ exists. And it's such a good fantasy spot. So I love paying up for him, especially in the big fields.
Okay, Sweet T. Fowler, who do you love paying up for?
Yeah, I think Russell Wilson, last week and this week, I think he's viable. I think he's going on the, last 5 weeks of the previous season and what he did there. So I love that call. But I'm going Justin Herbert. I believe he's $6,700, gentlemen. And look, I mentioned that the underrepresented value in this game. But more and more that I look into it, I'm a little bit worried about that call, Geoff. A little bit worried about my under call in this Dallas Chargers game. Look, Justin Herbert didn't have a great game in week 1, under 20 DK fantasy points, but now he gets a Dallas defense. He threw 47 pass attempts against Washington. What do we think he's going to do against this Dallas defense? This Dallas defense just allowed the overall QB5 from Tom Brady, who's 76 years old. This young gun who still's got a little bit of blemishes on his face. He's still a young lad in the NFL. I think stacking him with the Chargers receivers, which we'll get to in a little bit, I think is absolutely fine. I think his ownership goes a little bit under-owned this week because of that week 1 performance, but I love him.
AJ Scholz, your favorite quarterback, $6,500 or more.
I'm going to go right at the $6,500 mark, and I'm going to go with Jalen Hurts here. Look, the 49ers allowed 39.2 fantasy points on DraftKings last week. That was the 3rd most in the league for quarterbacks. So I like the matchup here that Hurts is getting. Racked up 264 yards, 3 TDs. And I think the X factor here is he picked up another 62 yards on the ground, which was 2nd most among QBs in week 1. I think this is a matchup made in heaven for Jalen Hurts here to have another big week.
All right, favorite running back now. We're talking $6,000 or north of that. Sweet T. Fowler, who's your dude?
David Montgomery. I think he's perpetually underappreciated because of how he started his rookie campaign. And look, who knows what Matt Nagy is doing, right, with this entire offense. We do see Damian Williams out-target him, right, last week, 5-1. So that's a little scary. But for tournaments, I think Montgomery is absolutely in play. I mean, look at what he did against the Rams. Over 100 yards on only 16 carries. And this guy in the last 7 games, Emerson, RB6, RB1, RB6, RB2, RB8, 5, and 8. This guy is an absolute monster when it comes to production. And maybe all of the metrics that we saw coming in as a prospect are they're not true, but they're potentially coming to fruition. Cincinnati is a much easier defense than the Rams. So I like Montgomery at 61.
Yeah, dude went off in week 1. Jeff, what about you, dude?
I really like David Montgomery as well. I wrote him up on DK Nation. You can go check that out whenever you want, my article. But
nice.
Another guy I really like paying up for, and I kind of like the fact that his price is up there because I think it's going to keep ownership lower. It's Nick Chubb. I mentioned earlier in the week, if you're expecting another miracle from Houston, don't. I don't think that's going to happen. This is just a bad rush defense. And, obviously Jacksonville couldn't take advantage of it. Trevor Lawrence maybe throwing some too many picks in his first start, but 4.8 yards allowed on the ground last week. Last year, Houston was the worst rush defense in terms of yards per carry allowed. Cleveland is going to be angry because they let the Chiefs off the hook. We know they're Dennis Green right now. We know who they are, et cetera, et cetera. You know the rant. Nick Chubb should get a pretty big workload here, and I also think the fact he shares carries with Kareem Hunt probably going to keep people off him. But I expect Chubb to get a lot of work because Cleveland, A, can't afford to lose this game, and B, this is their best way to attack Houston. So I love paying up for him here.
Okay, AJ, which running back do you expect to get a lot of work, so you're going to pay up for him?
Yeah, for me, I'm looking at Jonathan Taylor here at 7,200 in week 2. His on-the-ground yardage wasn't great against the Seahawks. He had just 56 yards on 17 carries, but he was targeted 7 times in the passing game. He made 6 catches for 60 yards. Looking at the defensive side here, the Rams allowed 120 rushing yards in week 1. That was 6th worst in the league. They did okay against the pass, but really struggled against the run. I think this is a good opportunity for Jonathan Taylor to take advantage of that.
All right, now we're going to favorite wide receiver over $6,000. Ulrich, I opened that article on the DK Sportsbook here on the DraftKings Nation website, and looks like you're going to throw DK Metcalf in there with Russell Wilson?
I mean, I definitely like that stack. That is a great stack to go. But because we've already talked about the Seahawks, we don't need to talk about them more. Let's go to the other side of that game, because part of that stack involves a guy named A.J. Brown. A lot of people concerned about A.J. Brown, the injury issues. He played over 80% of the snaps week 1. He led the Titans in targets. Now he comes to his Seattle secondary. It's still the Achilles heel of this team. They allowed Zach Pascal. They allowed 2 touchdowns to the opposing wide receiver core on Indy. Guys you probably can't even name last week. So this is a very good matchup for A.J. Brown. Again, I already talked about Tennessee. They like to play at a strong pace. But Seattle, they're the classic funnel to the pass defense. They're very good against the rush. They bottled up Jonathan Taylor last week. Could definitely bottle up Derrick Henry here. And I think A.J. Brown, if this game shoots out, going to be a monster one, because this is a secondary that simply can't handle A.J. Brown. So I love paying down for him. And then, again, you stack him with the Seattle guys you already mentioned.
Okay, AJ, talk to me. Wide receiver over $6,000.
I'm going to go back to Seattle, as Geoff said here. But I'm going to look at Tyler Lockett. You know, Tennessee absolutely shredded in week 1 by the Bucks, you know, and they really put up, you know, a ton of, gave up a ton of yards. Seattle, for their part, solid 4 touchdown game. Lockett got 2 of those. He caught 4 of 5 targets for 100 yards. I would expect more of the same. Obviously, there's a lot of pieces that can be options here, but I think Tyler Lockett should get plenty of targets and could have another big game.
Fowler, which wide receiver do you think could have a big game?
Yeah, I love both of those Seattle receivers. I'm going to lean a little bit more towards DK Metcalf, because I think a lot of people will go to Lockett. And we saw that they got the same amount of targets in that game, in that matchup. And DK Metcalf, you know, he's starting to become my Tony Finau here, Emerson. Like, this guy is like one of my favorite players to watch. He's a monster. But in the risk of just reiterating what we're already talking about, I like Keenan Allen. I mentioned Justin Herbert at the top. Stacking him with the quarterback in Herbert, but even going also with Mike Williams, I think is a solid play. If you look at what Keenan Allen has done with Herbert, averaged 10 targets and 18.6 PPR fantasy points per game last season with Herbert, and at home, 23.3 PPR fantasy points in the 7 games that Keenan Allen was in. Like, this guy is a monster when it comes to targets, and Herbert absolutely loves him. I think he's in for another big game this week against Dallas.
All right, gentlemen, if we're going to be spending up at all of these positions we have already discussed, how about your favorite value play under $4,500? Go ahead, Reid.
I'm gonna go Cedric Wilson, $3,100. You know, I'm just watching this Chargers Dallas game, but you know, Gallup was hurt, and what Wilson saw was 3 targets on 34 offensive snaps. He is a guy that we also saw last year come in and play, and have one big game. Everyone picked him up on the waiver wire, and then he kind of went and ghosted everybody. But against this defense, against Chargers, like they're better, but you know, it's something that if he gets the full complement of the Gallup snaps, which I don't think he does, but if he even gets, you know, 75% of those, I think he can pay up as, you know, what, $3,100, so close to the min price.
Jeff, what about you, man? Save us some cash.
I'm going to go to the Eagles game, because, again, I think that's a really good game to target. I know AJ talked about Jalen Hurts. I'm going to go to the other Jalen Reagor, to save some money. Only 4,100, over 70% of the snaps in week 1. The thing I like about what he did in week 1, he not only was he second on the team in targets with 6, but he converted all 6 of those targets into catches. Reagor had a really hard time in his rookie year doing that. He had a terrible catch rate. This is much, much better. I think this is going to be a good matchup. San Francisco secondary, definitely not that good. 4,100 for Reagor. I think people are sleeping on him a little bit here.
AJ, who do you think some folks out there could be sleeping on for a value play?
Well, I like Michael Pittman. I know I talked about the Rams' pass defense being a little bit better. He's 4,300 here. And you look at the targets in that first game, Hines got 8, Taylor 7. So you're talking about running backs getting the bulk of the targets. Pittman wasn't far off in terms of the wide receivers. 4 targets for him. He had 3 catches for just 29 yards. It wasn't a huge game from him, but I think that only serves to depress his drafted percentage heading into this week. I wouldn't expect to continue to see every single week that the running backs are getting the bulk of the targets here. So eventually the ball is going to go to some of these wide receivers, and I think Pittman's positioned well to get more share as the weeks go on here.